Racism in global development is a problem. It is a deep systemic issue.
We like to measure things in global development, but while there are many indices measuring gender equality in the sector, there are none focused on measuring racial equity. The Racial Equity Index is the very first index to measure racial equity in global development and hold the sector accountable for dismantling the systemic racism it was created to uphold.
We are a BIPOC-led collective.
We are global.
We are anti-racist.
Together, we collectively have over 50 years of experience working in the sector.
Every single person in our collective has experienced racism in global development.
The Racial Equity Index is groundbreaking and innovative, and will serve as a metric for the sector in order to reduce harm and make meaningful impact in areas of racial equity.
Success looks like racial equity intentionally incorporated and integrated by organizations in a sustained manner.
Success looks like permanently shifting the dialogue around racial equity in the sector, recognizing that racial inequity and injustices sit at the root of global development.
Success looks like dismantling of systemic racism in global development, and instead creating a more just and equitable sector.
Success looks like more Black, Indigenous, and people of color in senior roles across the sector.
We are
the Racial Equity Index.
This is a special podcast episode of the Racial Equity Index. This podcast was recorded during our weekly working group call on Friday, the 25th of February. We wanted to share with you the way in which we as a collective hold each other in community. There is so much going on in the world. So much of it is deeply triggering to many bodies of culture, to Black people, to Indigenous people. And as a collective that is working within the space of anti-racism and racial equity, we know that our healing has to be communal. And so we're sharing what occurred on Friday for us as a collective in the hopes that it can give you some ease too.
It's literally the reality that like Russia has been weakening Western governments for a long time through cyber warfare, and they're very calculated. They figured out how to do war more effectively in this time, and that is the scariest part. Is like they've adapted faster than most other places, and that's why in this case I'm just kind of like, I don't know how we could even bother to stop them. Like, I don't know who could at this point. They've been building for a long time. They've been integrating themselves into the politics of either every Western country. They've made sure to like put themselves in a position where no one really wants to take them on. That's wild. So yeah, it's super scary. I feel you, Alyssa. Like climate change, Ukraine, COVID, Syria still happening, Israel attacking Palestine still happening. Like, you know, Afghanistan is still happening. Yemen is still in famine. Like all this stuff is just still happening, and we speed by it. Like, oh no, we should just keep going. And I'm kind of like, no, we should take a second.
Yeah, that's exactly how I've been feeling this week. Like everyone's reposting our hopes and prayers for Ukraine. I stand with Ukraine. Like, well, yeah, but what about the 50 million other things that we're meant to be standing with as well? It's too much. So at some point, we need to understand we do not learn. We haven't learned. So what the fuck needs to change to be able to, we're going to implode at one point, at some point. I'm just waiting for that to happen. It's causing a lot of anxiety.
And just like the total disconnect on how we're like, we as humans are now consuming information. Like if you go on Instagram or Twitter, it's literally like end of the world, sports. Like how, you know, when you're like, how are we consuming information in this way? It's so strange. Like,
I do think it's really interesting. also just how much our cultures have picked up this kind of assumption that no matter what, we just have to keep going. And the thing is it's not like keep going and healing and like trying to like survive. It's keep going as if nothing's happening. And I'm like, oh, capitalism is so intense, where you can go to work, like even in the Ukraine, but they're being attacked and people are still going to work. I just want to note that. That's fucking wild. Like some cafes were still open. People were still going to their regular jobs. And I'm just like, no, boo, someone is invading you. I'm going to go with, you can panic now. It's wild. I mean, this whole thing is wild. It's just, it's super scary because also the rhetoric that Putin's using is super terrifying. To your point, just like the indoctrination camps for children, but also like just like over the past 6 years, kind of the rhetoric that slowly has been building of like that Russia has a right to Ukraine, and that, you know, they're saving Russians in the Ukraine. And it's just kind of like, that's wild. But that's how that's how wars start. I mean, that's literally what America said about Afghanistan and said about Iraq, is like, we're going in there to save the Iraqi and the Afghani people. And it's like, no, you're there for oil. Let's not lie to anybody today.
That's the only thing about the US is that they start wars everywhere, overthrow governments everywhere. Latin America, when everyone was in an uproar about how Russia intervened in their election in the US, everyone else were all like, really?
So, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. When everyone was like freaking out here, I was just like, you do know we do this literally everywhere. Like Europe and America were sitting at the table of like how elections would happen in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are you there? Well, we know all this stuff. It's interesting how we rewrite history. That's the part that I think is really interesting about this. It's like how easy it is to forget that this is all planned stuff. This is not like Putin woke up one day and was like, Ukraine is mine. Like, he's been planning this forever. But it is really scary on the, on the coattails of just so much that's been happening in the world. To have this at the same time is just kind of like, what is, like, seriously though, what is happening? Like, to what purpose? Like, where does this end? Because I don't know if that ends ever.
I think there's the other part of it though is as well, when the Eurocentrism of everything, like we're all talking about what's happening in Ukraine, and and to your point back in Chantel, this has been happening everywhere for a really long time, but because of our proximity to whiteness, this is something that is now front and center in everybody's radar. And we're saying the people of Ukraine, but also all of the people that fled from Syria and from Afghanistan went into Eastern Europe, went into Germany, went into Ukraine. So it's like they are being completely re-traumatized in this entire process again of having to experience war again and again and again and again. Where is safety for them and home for them? Can I ask you all a question here? Because, one of the arguments, I was talking with a friend of mine that's not in the social justice sector, and they were saying, I just feel hopeless. I feel like the world's going to shit, and it got me a little bit irritated, because I'm like, I see people grinding, like literally giving so much of themselves to creating such change and fighting for what is right and fighting for human rights and being defenders. Like, I know that there's a lot of shit happening, but I also know there's a ton of good people fucking working to make sure that the tide shifts in some way, shape, or form. Like, hope is not completely lost, but I could also see how someone that's not, for example, within our sector, or within our spaces looking at everything and just saying the world is fucked. You know, am I being like too rosy eyed, or what's that expression?
I think it's seeing the world through rose colored. Is that, I don't know. I don't know phrases. I think that's hard. That's hard for me to answer, because sometimes I wake up with that rejuvenation of I'm surrounded by people that are still giving it their all despite. But then other times I wake up just really fucking exhausted, because I know how hard we all work. And then on top of that, I know people who work harder, and usually they're people of color, and I don't know, just that's what brings me the anxiety is, it's just never ending for our community.
I think also what you said, Uma, is right. There are so many people out there like literally grinding day and night. And, you know, just picking up that point of what we talked about in the last meeting was that's not what gets airtime. So people just don't know. And what gets airtime is white men who are leading and doing bullshit everywhere. That's what people see.
I mean, I think another piece here is like, it's a both and situation, right? It's not like an either or. The world is on fire. And I think it is important that I don't know, the way I've kind of taken this is like, I think it's both important to let the space be like, fuck, the world is on fire. And be like, lean into that, to like really the reality of what is happening is the world is on fire. And sometimes when you're in that space, you're not ready to really see or hear all the great things that are happening, because they seem so small compared to the fact that the world is on fire. So that's okay, because that's also part of, I see it as like the world is actually grieving. I think human beings we're experiencing grief, collective grief, which is much harder than individual grief, because at individual grief, you're kind of, well, I mean, I guess it's not harder, it's just really different. Well, you're going through those motions by yourself. We are doing this as a collective, and everyone's at different stages, so it's really fucking frustrating. And it's a cycle, right? So sometimes somebody, you know, you wake up one morning, as Beck said, it's like, oh my God, today is the world is really rough, and there's so many people out there doing amazing things, and I want to like give more space and use my platforms to raise those voices and to show like the work that they're doing, so people see that, you know, they're not in this alone. Like, it's not that governments and official and politics and, you know, officials are just doing this work. It's like literally people on ground are actually doing this work. And I want to give space to that. There are also days we like, in the same week or even in the same day after a nap, that I'll just wake up and be like, oh, the world was on fire, and I actually just I'm going to go back to bed and hide, because this is really hard and I'm really tired. And I think that the world is experiencing that. But we're all just in such different stages that sometimes you want to rattle another person and be like, hey, you've been in the world is on fire and I'm going to hide for too long. It's time for you to come out and see something. Like, if you then do something. But as it is with all grief, you can't force people's process. Collective grief is hard. Like any type of grief is really difficult, and patience is one thing. Two, it's just, you know, continue to uplift and highlight the amazing work of the people who are doing and making change, to demonstrate that, you know, okay, you're feeling really hopeless. Here's one way in which you can support. Send money to this organization. Give your time to this person, listen to this thing, share this on social media, something, you know, like sometimes making it a very small, easy action is a way for people to feel involved without feeling like they have to be different. And I think the world is having a very rude awakening at this time to the fact that our systems don't work. And we're grieving, a world that we thought we were creating that we did not create.
That was really powerful, Chantal. We're grieving a world we thought we were creating, but one we didn't create. I think as well, we don't know that we're grieving. We don't name it as grief. So we don't know that that's actually what we're feeling or doing, because we haven't been taught how to grieve. We're expected to grieve in private. We're not expected to grieve in community. And we don't know how to support each other in that. I'm saying this very much of the experience of the past month and a half for me, where I've literally taken time for grief, but I've also noticed like, this is what we're all feeling and experiencing, but we don't, and Lena, there's no time for grieving. Where is the time for grieving? Where is the time to feel the enormity that grief sometimes is, and the monster that grief sometimes is, and the utter solitude and desolation that it tends to leave you in? I think we say that we're, we feel the rage, we feel the anger, we feel the upset, but we don't say we feel the grief. So Chantal, for you to name that as a reality that we're moving through is really powerful.
I mean, we don't have a culture that allows for it. Like, capitalism does not actually allow grief. That's part of the reason we don't say it. There are papers and there's documentation on collective grief around COVID. And people there's some social scientists who were interested in kind of like what is happening with our culture now that we are indoors and we're forced to be separated, which is, really, we are pack animals, so it really is against human nature to be so separated away from one another. And there was one author, scientist, who said, it's about this is grief and mourning, but then it kind of got overshadowed because then COVID became the norm, and people are like, when are we going to go back to normal life? And it's like, they're trying to make a normal life under extraneous circumstances. And I mean, I'm just thinking about this because California is lifting its mask laws. And I'm just like, this is bonkers. We live under a pandemic. It didn't go away. So why are we trying to act like things are back to normal when there is no back to normal? There will never be a back to normal. The world changed. And we need to adapt with it. And / also we need to make some time to just cry this out, team. This is pretty bad. But exactly as I think, Alyssa, you had mentioned, it's just the way we are taking in information is numbing. It's so fast, it's so quick, even in the news. I mean, honestly, I listen to news podcasts in the morning, and even we'll watch some of the BBC, and legitimately it's just it's erratic. It's kind of we're going to show you about the Ukraine. Oh, and then we're going to jump to this moment in classical music. And you're like, wait, what? What? What just happened? And I had to shut down the news for a long time. And then I just got back on it. And then I was like, I'm out again. This is wild. I don't know how to consume information this way. And my brain doesn't have any time to just understand things. It is really sad. We are in a really weird world. And I'm wondering, sometimes I think, have we always been in this weird, really weird world and we just didn't know it? Was I not conscious that this was the case? When my dad was, when I was a kid and my dad was the one listening to the news, I don't know. I know it's gotten more, the way we consume information is more hectic, but I think the world has always been chaos. And we've never actually tried to make sense of it. We just move past it as if it didn't matter.
I want to read something. This is, like I've been taking, I always take notes on things that stand out to me when I'm reading. And I've been rereading Joan Didion's A Year of Magical Thinking, just because it's a good companion to grief work, right? And this might be heavy, but when I read it, I was like, oh my God, that's what this is. That's what grief is. And so maybe it's helpful. But she writes, this is early on in the book. And if you haven't read A Year of Magical Thinking, it's a good read when you have the capacity for it. But she writes, grief is different. Grief has no distance. Grief comes in waves, paroxysms, sudden apprehensions that weaken the knees and blind the eyes and obliterate the dailiness of life. Virtually everyone who has ever experienced grief mentions this phenomenon of waves. Eric Lindemann, who is chief of psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital in the 1940s and interviewed many family members of those killed in the 1942 Coconut Grove fire, defined the phenomenon with absolute specificity in a famous 1944 study. Sensations of somatic distress occurring in waves lasting from 20 minutes to an hour at a time, a feeling of tightness in the throat, choking with shortness of breath, need for sighing, and an empty feeling in the abdomen, lack of muscular power, and an intense subjective distress described as tension or mental pain. And when I read that, and when I was moving through in January with the loss, I was like, that's it. That's what grief is. But again, when I read Joan Didion a few years ago, I didn't remember internalizing that as like a data point. And so this hit me differently because of the experience of December and January for me.
Probably hit differently too, Murray, because as you mentioned, this is probably one of the first times that you've stopped to allow yourself to grieve properly. So you can absorb, like you have the entry point, which is you've given yourself permission, right? And then all of the information that is relevant to what you're feeling can come in and be absorbed and sit within your body. But that's not what productivity is. That's not what we're meant to be doing. We're meant to just keep going and not allow time to sit and be like, this is how I'm actually feeling, and this is why, and this is what happens when I feel this way.
This is y'all know I'm doing the somatic abolition course. One of the things that Resma keeps on saying in this course is, especially for bodies of culture, we have a right to pause. We can pause, we can leave. We were never able to leave before, but we can leave and we can pause and we can stop and we can pause. But it's just like exactly what you just said, Beck. It's like, that's not productivity. Pausing isn't productivity.
Yeah, because you don't want to wake us up, right? Because then we'll actually be conscious of what we're meant to be conscious of, which is that we should just be existing. There shouldn't be any output. There shouldn't be any solution. Here is what I've produced from whatever it is I need to give you every week, every day, every hour, every minute.
Chantel, can you say more about what you just wrote?
Yeah, no, I think I love that I have really wonderful friends in my life who I get to connect with and share these thoughts with. But I just really appreciate that in a group that is working towards racial equity and in the work that we are actually actively doing, we are very conscious that the external world and external circumstances impact us every day. And it's very rare to be able to come into a group and just make space for the meeting to just be a conversation about the reality of the life in the world that we're living in, instead of like, okay, we have these 7 agenda items, we have to move forward. Like, I appreciate and I just really love that this is a group where we are not playing into or adopting this culture of productivity that is so toxic to every human and has been used consistently to maintain the status quo. Rather, we make space for ourselves to also just, this is a reality. Alyssa wrote it in the chat of just like, the things that are happening in the Ukraine, and the reality of climate change is just really overwhelming. And that can spark a whole 40-minute conversation for us of like, what does it look like to heal? And what does it look like to exist in a world that doesn't want us to pause to reflect on the type of world that has been created, that we are part of? It's really powerful. And I just really love you all for like allowing for that space, allowing for the reality of, we live in this world every day, and we're in various countries around this world. And we're in a lot of toxic spaces. We're in a lot of spaces where, we are forced to follow these arbitrary rules that were created by, the system that is literally killing us day to day, capitalism and, productivity. And to have a little respite, a space where we are both deeply productive and do amazing work, while also holding space for actual healing and talking about the realities of the world. I think this is the type of spaces that, revolutionists dreamt of. Like that is, I think we accidentally created it because it was so needed in our lives that we just did it. And that's something to me that's deeply amazing, we didn't consciously sit there and be like, okay, in the beginning of all meetings, we're going to have a check-in, and then we're going to just let it have its time. Sorry, that's my white voice. We didn't plan for this. We just let it. And I think that that's legitimately what people have talked about for years and for decades and for, forever, that what would it look like if the work that you did was healing, and if you allowed space to work while also being in the reality of the world you live in and where people care about you. And I'm so grateful for it. And I know, Uma, when you started this thing, and Lena, when you started all this work, and bringing these people together, I don't know what you hope for, but I hope this was bigger than your wildest dreams, because it's just, to me, it's so beautiful to be in a space where we can talk about the realities in which we're living, our fears, our hopes, our griefs, our mourning, our joy, and all these elements, while also at the same time continuing to move forward with something that the world needs, even though it's not ready for it. I think that's what revolution is. So thanks.
Lena, this is not all me. This is all us. This is all us.
That's the thing. You guys created something amazing. I know Uma, it was your original idea, and I'm going to give you full credit for that because you were like, oh my God, we should do a thing. And then everybody was like, well, what? This is awesome. And then Lena being like, hello, friend, I'm going to slide into your DMs and be like, hi, I'll help you with this experiment. And then, yeah, I mean,
this experiment.
I just like, that's pretty dope. Like, this came out so naturally. Like, this is what organic, like, it grew from a seed and now we're a ton of tree. And it's just like really impressive that we nurture our own soil. Like, no one's paying us. You know, like, this is our free time. And we use our free time really well because we do more than just the work.
Yeah.
We do the, like, this is the work, like what people say when they're like, have you done the work? Have you done your work? And it's like, I don't know what the work is. Like, what's the work? But like, we're doing the work. Like, this is the work. I'm going to assume, because I still don't know what people talk about when they ask me if I've done the work.
I don't even think they know. They're just like saying it.
I mean, you know, it sounds daunting, doesn't it, though, when someone is like, have you done your work? Like, have you done the work? And it's like, yes. No idea. No clue.
Oh
God. But I think we are. I think this is what that is. And I think we're doing it in a very cyclical and in a very realistic way of like, the work in quotes is never done. But yeah, we've in 2 years we've done, or a year and a half, we've done more than we ever thought we could. And more than that, we created a family. That's amazing.
I think that's the key for me. I know we're all still at the stage where we're volunteering our time each week, but the time that I think we dedicate, I at least feel like I get a lot back from that each week. I look forward to it. That has never happened. And I think that when, a perfect example, and the things that have happened since the group has kind of come together, I think it's radical and revolutionary because we've given ourselves the time to be that, meaning it's happened organically because we've all kind of sat back and said, well, today we can't, or today we can, or last week of the month we're not gonna meet. I told that to a friend of mine who has a startup, and he was like, he's a queer man in this horribly hetero real estate mogul sector here in Mexico. It's just disgusting. And he was like, that's radical. I hope you know what y'all are doing are radical. I'm like, yeah, it is. But this is being, though. This is how we all should be. This should be the norm. Like, calling it radical is wild, but absolutely it is.
Something else that I've noticed that for me is like, this space has taught me to unlearn a lot of what is then like promoted and, I don't know, like ingrained when you enter a particular workspace. Like, I never used to, before I started this current job that I have like a year and a half ago, I'm now noticing like these trends of like, you know, perfectionism and really just like getting right to business and, you know, like ingraining those white supremacy work culture characteristics in myself. And like, when I notice it, I'm like sickened. It is just, it like kills me to know that like, that is then transition, that sort of like, you know, influencing how I move in the workspace and how I interact with other people in the workspace and how harmful all that is. And so what I've also really appreciated about the space is that it sort of brings me back to like, no, this is not how you move. Like, this is not what you're supposed to be doing. Like, this is not healthy. Like, this is not good for your well-being or for the collective care. Like, and so that also for me has just been so powerful.
I agree. It's definitely made me more aware of the code switching that happens, which I think is a good and a bad thing, because then it makes me see how many different sides of myself I have to be in different settings where it's more demanded of you to be a certain way. And here it's just free in this space.
It's honestly as well, when there's, Alyssa, to your point, and Lena, to your point of the code switching, the unlearning, even from a facilitation standpoint, I've learned to listen more and feel into, and be okay with like what the space needs to be today. Because it's that ingrainedness of like, okay, we only have one working group meeting a week and we need to talk about all of these things, but we don't actually need to talk about all of these things because we will all get them done anyway. As Chantal said, we do the work, but this is also the work. And from a facilitation standpoint, it's been such a good unlearning and relearning of these threads of like, this is space too, and this is important too. I just want to say we started this discussion off with references to Hallmark movies, and then moved to Ukraine, and then moved to what we're all feeling, and now we're here. And this is the beauty of this group.
But again, it shows that fluidity of just like the human mind, of that, the fact that we come together deeply in love. Always. We come together deeply in love. And then we like slipped into the reality of like what we're all experiencing and making space for that. And then we come back into deep love. That's the thing that's really amazing about this, is we always end in deep love and we always start in deep love, and we are always throughout the process in love. It's just we're talking about the hard things because we know that this group can hold it together with each other, that we can, like, when I'm having a really hard time and I'm not able to show up fully, I know this group holds it for me. When one of us is struggling with life outside and life falling apart, this group holds it for them. That's the rarity of it, is we are an organization and group that comes at, like, with true trust and respect, not because we have to, because we built it. That's the roots of what started. Like, even the values, all the values that we have on our website, like, that's just a very small snippet of what actually our values have been, this is the safest place I've been able to be in, to be able to talk about what I'm thinking and feeling, even if I'm not coming as my best self. I can come as my worst here and know that I will be loved for it, and that this group can hold it for us. That's amazing. And as the world continues to burn, knowing that there are 11 people out there, or 10 humans out there who can hold me, is a comfort that's unique, because this is a chosen family. We weren't born into it, but we were drawn to it. We all showed up because we all craved something similar, and through a platform that you all, Uma and Lena, and created, we created a community that's been missing in our lives. That's unique. And I don't know if it's replicable. I really don't. I have no idea if one can replicate it, because it wasn't done. There wasn't a map for it. It just was. And I mean, let's be fair, every Hallmark movie is happening in chaos because they all show up and they're just like deeply in love. And you're like, you know, the world is burning. Also, you're in like Kentucky, dude. Like, it's rough there. Notice there are no Black people. Anyway.
Is that where you are? Is that why this is all happening?
No, we would never put a Uma in Kentucky.
What are you doing there?
Joshua Tree. She's in somewhere lovely, but yes, I will acknowledge that Joshua Tree. I've never been there, but Lena, you have a point about it could have also gone horror really fast. But let's stick with Hallmark because, you know, she was wearing a cozy hat before. A horror movie never happens when there's a cozy hat involved. Like, it just doesn't. She was eating an everything bagel with cream cheese. That's not a start of a horror movie. But you know, like, I think it's also just finding joy in the ridiculousness in which life is, and yeah, you really have to laugh at the world that has been created that, in all honesty, is most people's nightmare. And we found a tiny rock of where we get to live on a star together. And just, you know, every week, twice a week, sometimes 3, we get to come together in light and in love, no matter what.
Oh, I would just add one thing, that I guess we embrace humanity instead of denying us like the essence of our humanity.
So much of all of that, so much of the love to everybody. I think that is this week's call. That's it. Take care of yourselves, everybody.
This was amazing. Thanks all.